pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Fighting outside speed off. Bring in speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Hello and welcome to NASASpaceflight, the weekly show that talks about space industry news and events. I'm very happy to have you here today. On today's show, Astra does a power slide, Firefly does a flip, and Virgin Galactic can't do anything. Joining me today are our two guests, Thomas Burghardt and Adrian Beil. I'm your host, Matt Anderson. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing great, Matt. Happy to be on.
Good.
What an intro. Doing great.
I practiced.
I caught the Top Gear references in there, and
Thank you.
I can say I
appreciate
can
that.
dig it for sure.
Yeah.
Before we get started today, I do want to go ahead and thank all of our paid members for their continuing support of NASA Spaceflight and for allowing us to do the weekly live show, which is supported by our members. And just a gentle reminder that chat can ask questions at any time by tagging at NASA Spaceflight in the chat, either by normal chat or through super chats, whatever your preference would be. What are we talking about first, guys?
Well, we gotta start with the power slide, right? That was just the coolest thing ever.
Yes.
So, if you remembered last week, and by the way, apologies for no NSF Live last week, but we were a little busy looking at this thing. Astra with LV0006, and boy, was this a memorable launch. Of course, we had the awesome opportunity to partner with Astra and do this broadcast. I was out there in Alameda, California at their headquarters, and boy, was that moment something. I mean, a lot of people asked me after the fact, like on Twitter and stuff, was like, how did you not respond? Like, you didn't say anything when that happened. I was like, what did you want me to say? I expected the rocket to blow up in the next 5 seconds. It didn't. And then from Michael cutting to Brady's wide shot, the rocket appears out of the trees, and I go, I have no idea what's going on. And Carolina, the Astra commentator, goes, well, next up is going to be Max Q. I'm like, yeah, I guess. We really didn't know what else to say. It was one of the most memorable launches, I think, in recent spaceflight history. And yeah, it was fun to watch.
This is one of my all-time favorite launches. Just immediately, it goes in the Hall of Fame. And I would like to just say it's incredibly impressive that thing stayed intact for a full flip.
Yeah.
And seemed fine. It just kept going.
There was a trend of small launch vehicles doing flips but remaining mostly intact, of which I think we'll talk a little bit about the other one later too.
Is that Kerbal?
But
Oh, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so of course, after the fact, at the time we didn't really know what was going on. It was clearly underperforming. Obviously, once it did the power slide off the pad, even if it had all 5 of its engines still running, you would have incurred a huge energy loss in going sideways for the first couple seconds. But then it was still clear that it wasn't accelerating as quickly as it should have been. We were kind of wondering, like, well, if all 5 engines are running and it's still accelerating nominally, even after the initially off nominal liftoff, is it possible that this could get close to orbit still, even though it probably wasn't going to make it the whole way? But then once it became clear that it was underperforming, it didn't have the thrust, and it was not nearly high or fast enough when they were getting close to like when max Q was supposed to happen. It became clear it was not going to reach space, or especially not orbit. It ended up being because that initial power slide was because an engine failed less than a second after liftoff. Now, it's worth mentioning that the rocket checks the health of its engines before liftoff. The engines start, I think it was 3 seconds before liftoff is expected. So there's 3 seconds of data that the flight controllers get, and the onboard computers get prior to releasing the rocket. We saw that on the previous launch attempt where they actually aborted right at engine ignition due to some conditioning of the rocket that they had to correct for the next day. And when that happened, the engines, all automatically aborted the launch sequence. That didn't happen this time because the failure happened after liftoff, right after liftoff, but it was before, after the point where they could abort the launch and stay on the launch pad. So
It was
of
really
course,
it was sad to see, because as soon as you saw the launch clamps releasing the rocket and the rocket doing like this tiny bit of motion, you could see the failure happening at the bottom. Like it was just less than a second. If it happened less than a second earlier, the launch clamp still would be on, and it wouldn't lift off. So yeah, unfortunate timing.
I'm actually going to pull up something because Chris Kemp had some comments about this kind of thing, saying that with the 5 engines, the thrust to weight ratio is around 1.2, 1.25. I think there might have been some confusion here. He says 1.25 to 1 by design, but with 1 out, that would not be 1 to 1, even though that's what he's saying. So I got to get some clarification on that. Basically, that once it lost its engine, you can see it's basically just hovering sideways. Um, Barely enough thrust to prevent falling back down to the pad, which is
I'm
why it
amazed
kind
that
of
it
was
doesn't.
able to survive. And then as it burned off
Yeah.
fuel and became lighter, the thrust to weight goes up. So that was something interesting that we got to see here. And another thing that was demonstrated by this launch was the guidance system's ability to correct itself in that kind of setting and keep the rocket flying at least a little bit, which was honestly impressive. And I think Kemp also made a comment to the end of the guidance team has things to celebrate after this launch, and just saying that everything that happened after that failure made him incredibly proud of the team. And hopefully that whatever caused the engine failure is a small enough or focused enough issue that they can repair that and correct it for LV0007, which should launch hopefully before the end of the year. They're still hoping.
So right here, where it just went off behind the trees, and I thought there was no way. Like, there's no way. And then it just started going just slowly. I love it.
When you saw the shot of the trees, I expected any second to see a huge fireball.
Oh, yeah.
And that's it. Yeah, that's what I was expecting.
And Michael Baylor, who was there managing all the camera angles, he was the one cutting between the different feeds. I think he cut to that wide shot because he was expecting a fireball, and that's what you need, a wide shot to show that. But then the rocket appeared. I was like, oh, okay. It was definitely not what we expected to happen in that moment. And
I cheered.
yeah, I was
cheering.
stunned silent. Some other people were asking, like, was your mic muted? No, my mic was not muted during that part of the broadcast. I just didn't know what to say. It was, yeah, and then at some point we accepted that it wasn't going to succeed, and we'll see the termination. That's another thing that differentiates itself from the other small sat launch failure that we'll talk about later. This flight was just terminated by ending the thrust of the first stage and letting it fall within the protected corridor that they have going down from Kodiak, Alaska, rather than actually blowing up the rocket. Again, just another way to safely make sure that nothing outside the protected area gets hit with any debris or anything like that. So yeah, we'll see that, and the rocket kind of spins out of control, stays mostly intact, but obviously not going to space.
Yeah.
It was also weird to be in the room with the engineers who were working on the project. Obviously we were broadcasting from the factory floor in Alameda, and actually right behind us there was a big group of employees. Chris Kemp was there, a couple other any people who were not in mission control actually working the launch, but worked at Astra were watching that way on a big screen behind us, and obviously they had lots of reactions to what was happening. But talking to some of them after the fact, the reaction was surprising but not surprising. They were very professional about it. Here you can see the termination there, when we knew the flight was definitely over at that point. A lot of them, their response was on to the next one. Astra has done this before. They are taking this very iterative path towards reaching orbit, learning as much as they can and accepting that there are risks with these early test flights, but knowing as long as they learn from it, they'll make progress and get closer the next time. Obviously, this flight that didn't physically get closer to orbit, but they're still taking all of the lessons learned, and hopefully the things they learned from this flight set them up nicely for the next one. And we got to thank you, Michael, pointing out something that we did see right at liftoff. He'll play this forward, and there is an evidently uncontrolled failure of some kind. I can't confirm that that's the actual engine failure or if it's something related to it, or this is the cause of the engine failure, but you see like the raceway on the side of the rocket gets blown up, and you can see it even later when the flight gets terminated, the thrust gets terminated. You can see like a piece of metal flapping, not structurally, not still stuck to the vehicle, kind of a sign that there was some damage sustained at the bottom of the vehicle. Again, it could have been the engine failed in an uncontained way and exploded, causing damage to the other parts of the vehicle, or something else within the vehicle connected to that raceway failed, causing an engine failure. Could have gone either way. I don't have any information on that, but you can see that right at liftoff, and that's where, of course, things went wrong. Um,
I, I mean, they were lucky that it went in that direction where basically this gate was open and
yeah.
their rocket actually had a path to escape the pad. If it went the other way, there's not that much space to go there.
There were a couple. There's a couple gates around the outside of the pad that are all left open before the red team leads, which I think is mostly there. And yeah, there you go, see it in this feed. I think that's mostly there just to help let exhaust escape and not just blow a hole through the fence every time. Well, we can leave it open, you know. So I believe that that's the purpose of it. But a added benefit to, and I can't tell, the rocket might have just been above the fence line anyway. You can see it's still raised on that launcher box. So I don't know for sure if it would have cleared it anyway, but definitely some added help there. No, not hitting a fence on the way out. Um, but yeah, and then so being in the room with them after the fact, a lot of the Astra team members were like, on to the next one. We're going to learn from this. Yeah, we're disappointed, but they were all very professional about it. And the team there is excited to learn from each of these flights and fly again. Um, we're certainly excited to watch them do it again because I think they'll be back pretty soon, hopefully. And there's a lot of cool things that can come from the kind of things Astra's trying to do. So it takes another try to get to orbit, so be it. Even if it takes a couple more tries, they're going to keep learning from it, and that's just what they're all about. So it was really cool. It was a tough experience. I've never been in the room with people who worked on a rocket as it was failing, so that was new to me. But I was impressed by how the team reacted to it, and wishing them the best of luck to fly again soon.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, Thomas, but there is another rocket basically close to being ready in the factory of them. So
Right.
they need to find out, of course, what happened here, what went wrong, and fix it. But it's not like they have to start from zero again. They have another vehicle in the builds.
Yeah, the LV0007, they're giving these serial numbers to their rockets. This was LV6. LV7 was pretty close to ready, obviously not complete. They're still ramping up their production stuff, but it was very close to readiness. Obviously, if they go through their investigation and find things they have to go back and tweak, they'll have to do that. And I actually talked to a couple of the members of the Astra team in some interviews, some of which are still forthcoming on the channel. Stay tuned. We do have more Astra content coming your way. But there was also a bit of I like to ask a lot of people, how do you balance ramping up your production cadence, having all these rockets in various stages of production, and also being able to go back and fix things when it's early in the development process? And they were talking a lot about how they balance that. Obviously, once they get past the development process, more into operational launches, that'll become less of an issue. But either way, they're prepared to quickly get back to the pad.
This is sort of a backwards way to look at things, I know, but as a spectator, it was almost more impressive seeing that thing go sideways and compensate and correct and keep going than if it had just been a normal, like, nominal launch. Like, I
Yeah,
know
it
that's
was
not what you
impressive in
want
a
to
different
happen, but
way.
yeah, from an entertainment perspective, that was really cool.
You
It
always
was
see them
very
go up.
cool. In hindsight, it's easy to go back and make light of it. Obviously, in the time, it's disappointing, but
Yeah.
also I think even the team members are able to make light of this now. And there were a lot of good memes that came out of the launch. I have to acknowledge that some people were very creative, and you know, as long as you learn from it and move forward, I think that's good.
We have a couple of super chats about this that I'd like to approach real quick. David Dean says, "Thank you, NASA Spaceflight and Astra, for live streaming Need for Speed Kodiak Drift. That was awesome."
Excellent. See, I
Um,
told you the memes are perfect for this launch. It was a good one.
Yeah. The one by Scott Manley with the SpaceX and Space Epsilon one, that was also really, that made me giggle a lot.
Kendall Winters said, "I just found a video from a bear with a GoPro running from the sideways Sam."
There were bears. The rain. We joke here at Kennedy. We have the Gators and the Pelicans, which make up the security force of Kennedy Space Center. Up in Kodiak, they've got bears up there. Every range has got their different security animals, but it's really cool.
Musical Jokes is in with Musical Wolves. Sorry, Musical Wolves is in with the jokes again. Can we see Astra style be a new way to roll out starships and super heavies to the pad instead of using a transporter?
Don't give Elon ideas.
I honestly could see him doing that. just a little hop over.
Would that reduce or increase the damage to Highway 4 if they did it that way?
The best transporter is no transporter.
Oh no.
And then finally here, Connor James Evans says, when it came out from behind the tree line, I was in shock. But then she said they were trying for Max Q, and I was in absolute awe. I did love how they just went, okay, stay on the plan. Let's go.
Yep, and to be fair, that did happen next. Okay, she wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
Carolina was great to work with. All of the Astra team was awesome to work with. Their comms team, the higher ups that we were doing interviews with, it was very, very pleasant to work with all of them on their first publicly broadcasted launch. It was awesome.
Do we have anything else with Astra?
Unless we have more questions, but we've got other stuff to talk about as well.
Yeah. Go ahead and throw your questions in chat. We can always circle back to it if you want. Otherwise, we can move on to Firefly Alpha and its own flip that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Firefly doing some acrobatics of its own as well. First ever launch attempt, so a bit different from the Astra setup. And this is video from Jack Beil and Michael Baylor, both of which were out at Vandenberg in California for the launch. Excuse me. There is Firefly Alpha lifting off of the pad. Initially looked very nominal. I will point out in a second here, where is it? There is a point in this shot where you start to
Coming
see
up
what looks like
now.
an engine failure. There you
There.
go. You see that spurt of flame right there. Firefly has not put any official information as to what the cause of this failure actually was. But the public facing video and speculation has started, and it does look like there was possibly an engine failure a few more seconds after liftoff. Not immediately like Astra, maybe 10 to 15 seconds after liftoff. And that could have resulted in a performance shortfall, which then kind of give you a similar situation to Astra, where it wasn't going to reach orbit, it didn't have the thrust to do so, and thus when it got to that transonic regime, it lost control, and we'll see that here in a little bit. But this was the very first orbital launch attempt from Firefly Aerospace, their rocket Alpha as their first launch vehicle. This is bigger than the Astra launch vehicle. It's actually one of the bigger small-sat launch vehicles out there, about 1,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit, depending on the launch site and the orbit you're going to and things like that. This particular launch going to a not quite polar orbit, but a southerly orbit from Vandenberg in California. And actually had some payloads on board, which is different for a first flight of a vehicle. It was a free of charge launch. They opened this up to, if you want a free ride to space, know that the rocket isn't proven yet, as evident by this launch. But there were actually some payloads on board. Obviously, were not deployed, failed during first stage flight. They had a call out about a little bit after when they were expecting to go through max Q and go supersonic, that they called out that they were not yet supersonic, which was an indication of an underperformance. And when that happened, we kind of knew that this was not going to reach orbit. And later on, pretty much right after they called out that they was finally supersonic, you'll see the vehicle lose control, do a couple spins, and then the flight termination system is activated by the range. A couple of people said calling it an AFTS. I do not believe this. If it had an AFTS, it was not active. This was a more traditional flight termination system activation. Someone on the ground actually sending a signal to terminate the flight, and that's done by destroying the vehicle. So all the debris will fall down in the protected corridor. There is that rocket,
There we
and
go.
boy, you can see the payload fairing and the payloads kind of shear off when it first makes that turn. And then you see
That it
the termination
survived the
system.
first flip.
Yeah.
That's just.
I
Wow.
I know that I misspoke earlier when I mentioned that, but that really was just so impressive to me that it managed to do a full rotation and just it looked no worse for wear until it exploded.
Yeah, obviously, and that's just part of keeping the range safe and all of that.
Yeah.
Some people were pointing out that, if that rocket can do a flip, and this kind of goes to the Astra rocket too, I guess. If it goes through that flip and doesn't disintegrate, does that mean they overbuilt it? Does that mean it's too heavy and they actually are eating into their performance? Um, Not really, because there's a lot of different loads that the rocket has to experience during flight. And even though, yeah, obviously it's not intended to fly sideways, it might still need to take loads in those directions at various points in flight. So especially under different wind conditions and things like that. Um, Upper level winds is one of those criteria we talk about a lot when launching rockets, and those are loads against the side of the vehicle as it flies. It's not a fair conclusion to say that they've overbuilt the rocket because it survived like that. I think it's a sign that the structures are well built. I don't see that as a sign of a problem. Yeah, there you see,
Yeah,
you
also
see that
this
payload
probably
fairing
wasn't
just
the
disintegrate.
point. I mean, this wasn't the point where the rocket was right now in max Q. So even if it does the flip at that point, when the general loads on the vehicle right now is low, it might even survive a flip here. But if it does a flip at max Q, it probably won't. So yeah, it's not necessarily anything.
This is again nominal to my Kerbal experience. That's the normal flight plan.
This was so Kerbal. Like,
Yeah, I mean, to be fair,
this,
so was the Astra one, though. Like, I've had rockets go sideways off the
oh,
pad in Kerbal. It's a thing that happens. In Kerbal, it's more recoverable. There's a lot more forgiving in that environment. We're not huge fans of the idiom around here, but space is hard. Were two very early launch attempts for the company, still working on getting their ways to orbit. I know if Jack's watching, he's gonna be like, space is hard. I hate that phrase. It's true though. And Firefly will hopefully be back before too long after their own investigation. Um, it's always good to have new rockets on board, and hopefully wish them the best success on their next attempt.
what I admire about both of these launches is that both invited media to cover it, both live streamed the launch with the help of Firefly with EDA and Astra with us. So I'm really happy that they decided to show these, and failure was an option for both of them. So they accepted that they might show a failure to the public, and they still did it, and I admire that, and I love that.
Yes, and that's another point that these are commercial companies, and when you're not launching something for NASA or the government and any other agency, um, there's not really a valid argument, at least not one that I've thought of, about like demanding transparency on these things. If you're a commercial company launching a commercial payload from a commercial launch site, what's the public's argument that like, oh, you need to be transparent about this? These companies do not technically need to do that. It's become a bit of a standard, especially with the rise of SpaceX, probably the first kind of example of that. They were webcasting their early Falcon 1 launches even. And so it's kind of become the standard where, yeah, even if you're a commercial company, broadcasting your launches, including your early ones, is something to be proud of. Obviously, SpaceX, it's a little bit different, especially if you look at the Starship program that is partially taxpayer funded now. They're partnering with NASA on that kind of thing. So there's other arguments to be made in those contexts, but even then, the fact that Astra and Firefly both said we want us to be transparent about this. With due time, obviously, we don't expect them to show their very early qualification testing and things like that. But launch attempts and they're both of them being ready to show that publicly says a lot. And even if it's not something that needs to be rightfully demanded by the public as far as transparency goes, it does go a long way as far as outreach is concerned, getting people excited about spaceflight, seeing rocket launches like this, even the ones that fail and blow up, get people interested in what's going on and might get them interested in your company or just the space program in general. And I think, especially with the Astra launch, I think a lot of people seeing that rocket correct itself and try its hardest to get as close to orbit as it can. I think that got more people excited to watch the next launch, which is honestly a really good outcome from everyone involved. So, yeah, so some words of thankfulness to the companies that are showing transparency in these kind of things and allowing us to help them do so. It's awesome.
Also,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I
Okay.
insist.
Okay, then we also saw SpaceX before mention their jobs page on the webcast, because webcasts are a good tool to recruit new students and new workers. And these companies are in the same situation, I bet. They need to find good, qualified people. And what is better to find good and qualified people and sell them on your company than to show what you're doing? So that is another point about these live streams, which I think is a huge factor in why they decide to go public with live streams.
Absolutely, and that was something that came up in the Astra stream too. People were asking questions like, "Hey, what kind of people is Astra looking to hire? Is Astra hiring? Does Astra do internships?" Those questions were coming in on that Astra feed, and those are some of my favorite questions to answer, and letting Astra speak to that behalf. And that's the other part. I didn't talk about this with Astra. Astra is a publicly traded company, which is why some of our broadcasts we had to just make sure that the Astra spokesperson Carolina was saying things that were approved company language and things like that. That's an added challenge that we never have to deal with. NASA Spaceflight, as an independent news organization, if we're just doing a broadcast on our own, aren't held to any sort of SEC legislation or anything like that. We can offer our own speculation based on public info. The only what we're risking is our not reliability, journalistic oh god, what's the word?
Integrity,
Maybe or
reputation.
reputation. I think reputation is the word I'm looking for. People or credibility, yeah. So things like that, just saying like NASA spaceflight. If we say something stupid, people are gonna, oh, NASA spaceflight, they don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes we're wrong, I understand that, but we try our best not to be, and we try to mark things as speculation as anything. We still don't have that giant flashing speculation banner on streams. Maybe we should still get on that. But otherwise, when we're doing our own broadcast, we can do a little bit of that. Less so when it's also a semi-official stream, but we try to bring the NSF style. We try to do a lot of question and answer, and offer the independent news perspective of the launch rather than a broadcast produced solely by the company operating the vehicle. And I think that was really cool, and hopefully we see more of that going forward.
And that is one of the
Yes.
reasons why I am here, so that I can get nervous and say the dumb things and make them look all the better. We did have a question from Harry Young in chat who was asking if we could talk about the single abort call out at T2ish, which goes along with the super chat that we had from Robot with Rockets Wannabe, who says, was that single word abort called out at T2 like the first attempt, but they kept going this time?
Right. So
Uh,
there was an audio call out right before liftoff that sounded like abort for sure. Unfortunately, without being in the room, without knowing what console called that, all of those things, I don't want to jump to any conclusions about what that might have been. If it was some sort of clipped audio that was part of a larger sentence, there are things like that that could play into this. Generally speaking, the procedure for holding a countdown in the last couple minutes is a 3-word hold. You will hear a call out hold, hold, hold. And that's just to reiterate that, yes, you are actually calling a hold. It kind of eliminates some confusion there if you just hear one word. I don't recall Firefly giving any sort of briefing during their countdown. To that end, if you listen to a SpaceX pre-launch countdown, or if you listen to, I think the Astra the countdown had this too. There's a briefing that happens when you're getting into the final minutes of the countdown, saying, if at any point you need to call a hold of some kind, you will issue a 3-word hold, or you will call hold, 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 something along those lines. That kind of briefing is very common pre-launch, and I don't believe we heard that on the Firefly net, although I could just be mistaken. So yeah, I don't want to jump to conclusion on that just because I don't know the context to that call out. Obviously, if an abort does get called before liftoff and then the rocket launches anyway, there's a communications breakdown there that could have saved the mission potentially. So um, there's something to talk about there, but I think we'll wait for more information before I dive into too much more speculation.
a few people in chat are saying that there was a T minus 30 minutes, in fact, a briefing about that they should call 3 times aboard. So
Okay.
I missed that as well, but many people say it right now, so I guess that was the thing. And then that also indicates that this was not an abort, since it only was pointed out one time.
Gotcha.
We also had something from Musical Wolves again, who said, what was that big part that went higher after the FTS? And again, thank you, Musical Wolves, for your support.
Oh,
Yeah, there was part of the rocket that kind of continued. Flying isn't the right word, but continued gaining
ascending.
altitude after the fact more than the rest of the rocket. I'm not sure. Some people have claimed like, oh, clearly that's an engine. Like, well, if an engine's not attached to a tank, it can't produce thrust. So I don't know if that makes sense. It might have been like a pressure vessel of some kind that had pressurized gases that were escaping, giving thrust. That would probably be my best bet. Um, but it was also kind of on fire, and if it was like a nitrogen tank or something like that wouldn't work. But if it was some other pressurized gas, maybe that's possible. There are a couple different explanations for that, maybe, but otherwise, I don't really have a good theory on that yet. Pressurized vessel would be my best guess.
Yeah.
And this is just a random question from me, but of our two failed launches this week, which one do you think had the prettier boom?
Oh, that has to be Firefly for me. The boom
Yeah.
was more fancy.
Astra didn't really have a boom. Astra had a kerplunk into the ocean. I don't know what you want to
Yeah.
call that. Firefly had the boom though, and I mean, hopefully, once they reach orbit later, it'll be easier to go back and appreciate that it did kind of look cool, even though right now it's kind of like, well, it was a launch failure. Those things can be painful sometimes, especially if you're on the teams. But
I
yeah,
like high
the
dives.
visually spectacular for sure.
To be fair, Astra counters that with going horizontal. So I
Yeah.
would call it even in the end.
All right. Is that are we wrapped up there on Firefly then? Anybody else have any other questions in chat for Firefly before we go on to Virgin Galactic? There's some news with them this week.
Oh, are we gonna make like references to the TV show and the fact that their engines, which are called Reavers, might have caused the destruction of
Oh God.
Firefly? I mean, I'm mostly stealing all of that from Scott Manley. He's the one that pointed it out, so shout out to Scott.
There was a moment where it looked like a leaf on the wind.
It's true.
Here I am saying that I
Uh,
never watched Firefly in my life because it always came in German television after Stargate, and I watched Stargate and then turned off the television. So sorry.
highly recommend. I haven't finished it yet. I'm actually in the middle of watching it right now, but I know enough to know the references. So
We'll watch.
Yeah. Go ahead. All right. So Virgin Galactic was grounded by the FAA this week. Why was that?
right, so Virgin Galactic on their most recent space flight had some excitement. Their most recent flight had Richard Branson on board, the founder of the company, along with some other crew members, kind of part of the demonstration, I guess, of the system safety before they start flying paying customers. And on this flight, a report has come out that they had a warning light come up during their ascent, basically saying that they weren't pitching up high enough, so they weren't ascending as quickly as they needed to be, a more shallow ascent profile. And that was going to put them at risk of deviating from their approved trajectory and actually leaving the airspace that they were approved to fly in. That warning light became reality when they did in fact deviate from the trajectory enough that they were actually outside their approved airspace, and thus the FAA is doing an investigation into the flight, and Virgin Galactic is grounded for the time being. The FAA probably did this pretty much immediately after the flight, but we didn't really hear about this until right after Virgin Galactic actually announced the crew to their next mission, Unity 23, which I believe will have some Italian researchers on board, so it'll be a suborbital research flight. Very cool. However, the FAA said, "Well, hold on, you're not approved to do that yet because we're still investigating this thing on your prior flight." Obviously, it didn't result in anything. The crew was able to safely return to Spaceport America, but there is a statement from the FAA saying that they were investigating the July 11th Spaceship Two mishap, involving a deviation from its ATC clearance, and that Virgin Galactic may not return Spaceship Two to flight until the FAA approves the investigation. And so that came after the crew announcement, and then Virgin Galactic released a statement after the fact, basically saying we're still working with the FAA on solving this and working with them to approve Spaceship Two to fly. There's some other aspects to the story though. It's not as simple as Virgin Galactic had an isolated anomaly on a test flight that needs to be investigated before they continue flying. That does happen, by the way, with every mishap. It'll happen with the Astra flight. It's happening with the Firefly flight. Anytime there is an off-nominal spaceflight event, the FAA gets involved, and that's standard procedure. I saw some comments on the internet talking about things like, oh, the FAA getting in the way of spaceflight progress or something like that. This is standard procedure for every launch failure. The FAA has a job in helping these companies get through their investigations and making sure that safety protocols are followed and all of that. Um, this isn't them jumping in on things that, you know, they deem to require their intervention in. This is just no questions asked. If a launch fails of any kind, um, the FAA gets involved. So they're working on that. The other side of the story is this was the first spaceflight without Mark Stuckey acting as the chief test pilot at Virgin Galactic. He was chief test pilot at the company for a very long time, had a lot of test flight experience. You're seeing a replay of this now. I keep forgetting that we saw the launch happen twice because our camera was so far ahead of the official one. Um, Mark Stuckey was Virgin Galactic's test pilot, and before the Richard Branson spaceflight, the Unity 22 mission was stripped of his flight duties in connection with some comments that he had made to some other reporters about the safety culture at Virgin Galactic, saying that there were some things not some things happening at that company that were not safe or responsible. There were stories such as being asked to sign off on things that engineers did not find were actually safe to sign off on prior to flight and things like that. Virgin Galactic also, most of the time, if we see a story that comes out like this, and this is wandering into personal opinion to mark this appropriately, when you see a story come out like that and there's a safety concern at a spaceflight company, for instance, especially a human spaceflight company, sometimes you can give the benefit of the doubt a little bit and you can say this is a one-time incident, and they'll work through it and correct it, which is most of the time what happens. A lot of these private spaceflight companies can't afford a human spaceflight failure. That would be detrimental to, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin. If something happened like that, that's not necessarily survivable as a company and a program. Virgin Galactic does not have the track record to say that this is a one-time event. Back several years ago, there was actually a Spaceship Two crash that killed one of its two pilots. There have been other stories of previous flights that came very close to having also very serious failures that could have definitely endangered the lives of those on board. So Virgin Galactic, unfortunately, now is gaining a reputation for not having the a good safety culture, which is really needed when you're flying humans to space. It hasn't, save for that very early crash with the VSS Enterprise, um, hasn't resulted in anything yet, which is why, again, we're kind of saying this from an outsider looking in for the most part, but there are credible reports out there that there are other things going on. Hopefully, these kind of reports coming out with increasing frequency could give the folks at Virgin Galactic ammunition to go at this and say we need to change things, and hope that the test pilots and the engineers can get their voices heard, and before something really catastrophic happens. But this is a story that we're now following again at this company. We hope that they this can be something that's improved upon. But for in the meantime, we'll be keeping an eye on Virgin Galactic as they are grounded while this investigation proceeds.
It's
Is it
certainly not a.
concerning?
Oh,
I
no,
was
no,
just going to
I
ask if it's
insist.
I was going to ask if it's concerning at all that they would decide to punish employees for speaking out about safety concerns when it's clear that they do have some at any rate. Would that encourage other employees not to speak up about it?
Absolutely. There's reasons that, lots of companies have many different ways for engineers to raise concerns. I believe there was a story from several years ago at SpaceX. If you were as an engineer have a concern about safety, or it wasn't really limited to safety. It was pretty much anything. If you have an idea that isn't being heard, whether it's regarding a safety concern or just like an idea for something to be made better, anything like that. Um, like Elon's email is always available. Like you could go to the very top if you need to, if you're not being heard. That was a thing that Elon has talked about at SpaceX. And I think that kind of system is prevalent in lots of spaceflight companies, and just ways for people having lots of different ways to speak out if they see something that needs to be addressed, especially in the context of human spaceflight and safety concerns. Um, at Virgin Galactic, there's a couple stories that indicate that that is not the case, and that there are lots of people being told that their concerns are not going to be addressed and kind of being overlooked. So that is concerning, and that, like you said, discourages other people from speaking out when they see something.
Yeah, I really don't like the whole connection or the situation when you have an employee who is, it seems like, fired for having safety concerns, and then basically together with this comes out a story that you ignored, like a safety warning on a flight. That's a combination you never want to have, because it kind of is like two things pointing into the same direction.
Yep.
And that's not what I like, because one thing of both could still be like, yeah, maybe it's a false story, maybe it's overblown, but this feels different, and especially with humans on board, it's always a different kind of story. And I'm really glad the FAA is looking into this, because the most important thing is always to have the humans safe on the vehicles, and never sacrifice safety for the sake of launching.
It's also worth talking about what exactly this failure was. I know we said it was a not steep enough ascent profile. The reason for that being, there's basically a cone emanating from the runway at Spaceport America that, as long as the vehicle remains within, it will have the energy to glide back to the runway. It uses a rocket motor on the way up, but it glides on the way back down. And so if it flies basically too horizontal away from the spaceport, and isn't close enough to the runway, it would have to ditch somewhere in the middle of the desert because it can't reach the runway. That was the concern that this warning light was basically telling the crew, saying like, hey, you need to climb steeper to make sure that you'll be close enough to the runway when you come back down. Spaceship Two is a piloted spacecraft. It does not fly completely autonomously, which is a fairly unique feature to Spaceship Two. In fact, I can't think of, off the top of my head, any current active spacecraft that aren't completely automated. New Shepard is an automated system. Crew Dragon, Starliner, Orion, all of those things. Even the shuttle flew uh, compute on a computer. You go back to like the X-15 days, then we're talking about some other piloted spacecraft. But Spaceship Two is that relies on the pilot's ability to fly it appropriately. Um, there is obviously guidance involved, and their systems will tell them basically kind of the trajectory to fly. Um, but it's the pilots actually doing it, and so that is the concern that they had. And obviously, you can tell that they were able to glide back safely. So it didn't end up with a bad outcome in the end, but that was the warning that they were getting that's being talked about now.
Now Chris B is excited because you mentioned shuttle.
Gotta get the shuttle reference in, of course.
Beyond the short-term delays that are going to come out from this grounding, what are the potential long-term consequences from the FAA doing an investigation into this?
Well, it does depend on, what they see as causes to the problem. If they see a widespread safety culture problem, they have the authority to talk with everyone and talk with everyone at the company and say, look, this needs to be fixed before you fly again because this is an unsafe operation. That's something they can do. Um, so as far as it could result in actually longer term delays rather than just delaying the next flight a couple months. Um, and it's hard to say what the timeline of this will be. But if Virgin Galactic fails to comply with whatever the FAA requires coming out of this investigation, that can result in the ending of the company. That's obviously an extreme case, and I don't think that's anywhere near what we expect. I think what we expect is the FAA to work with Virgin Galactic together, implement corrective actions to prevent these safety issues from happening again, and allow them to safely return to flight. That is the expected response.
Adrian, how concerned are you that Richard Branson is looking more and more like Mickey Rourke in Iron Man 2?
That is an interesting question as a person who never saw a Marvel movie.
Ouch, I pitched that wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just joking around.
Yeah,
go ahead.
What I mean, if you for example look at SpaceX in Boca, we saw the FAA implementing an inspector, for example, who has to watch every launch. We saw there what they can do when they have concerns about something, and that's just one of the many possibilities the FAA has in such a case to make sure that flight is conducted. And again, Starship is not crewed right now. Spaceship 2 is. So I'm sure that will be part of the considerations the FAA has.
To tap into the super chats real quick, we have a small tip from a slightly unhappy face. Dave K just became a new member. Thank you very much, Dave K. We appreciate that. Thank you for supporting the channel. Dougal says, nice of you all not to stream the Firefly test or to do the Firefly test. I'm sure what that one was.
So not doing our own broadcast.
Oh.
Yeah, we didn't have a setup for streaming that launch, and of course Tim had it covered over at Everyday Astronaut, so live coverage was handled.
Got it. And Jim Cavett says, thanks NSF. Kind of a yikes kind of week.
Oh, is this time for an NSF merch plug? Hold on a second. Yikes, you bet, concur. We don't need any more. This is a shirt. NASASpaceflight.com/shop. Check it out. Okay, I'm done plugging now.
That's
the
beautiful.
Polos are also really good.
We need links in chat to the merch store.
Do it. It's funny. This shirt existed on our shop for like a while before I even noticed, and I was like, "Wait, we have this shirt? I need one."
All right, that's everything that we have in there. Let's see. I think that's everything for Virgin, yeah?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody here wants to hear about SpaceX.
Nobody cares
right
about
crowd.
that company.
What's going on with the Starship this week?
Adrian, you want to take this away? You're the Starship expert, to be honest, between the two of us.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, the big thing probably was the lift of the quick disconnect arm onto the launch tower. So that quick disconnect arm will help fuel the rocket before a launch, and also, as Elon confirmed on Twitter, help the rocket stay in place when it's sitting there waiting for its launch. We also saw some ground support equipment rolling out to the pad. We saw, I think, one test tank and one cryo shell. And we saw the little test tank, the one that was pressurized last week, I think, go back to the production site. So there was a lot of traffic on the highway the past few days. Not really any testing going on that is really to speak about, but the interesting thing for sure right now is all the infrastructure rolling still out, them placing the shells and placing the cryo tanks. And also we had a flyby by the Inspiration 4 crew, which was posted on social media and also was visible on our 24/7 stream, Starbase Live.
Nice plug, Adrian. Adrian's getting the hang of that. Plug the 24/7 stream always.
I'm learning.
Yeah, they're still working on a lot of preparations things. That's weird. I was about to call it, it's been quiet in Boca Chica, as if rolling out giant GSE tanks and jet flyovers are quiet in any way, shape, or form. But seriously, there's still activity going on, and it's all focused around preparing for the orbital test flight. They're working on Starship 20. The big ticket there is the thermal protection system, continuing to work through. You see all of those markings on all of the heat shield tiles, working through, making sure they're all set to go, filling in any gaps that are there. And then they're going to move into, we're still waiting for cryogenic pressure testing on Starship 20. That should be probably the first round of big pre-flight testing that we see coming up, whenever they are ready for that. They are also getting the GSE tanks installed and in place. They're rolling out more tanks, rolling out more shells to go over them. Slowly but surely getting all of those installed. So there's some more progress, on the ground side of things. And then, of course, the quick disconnect arm being lifted up for fueling and structural support purposes. The first item that has been lifted up onto the launch tower That'll be combined with some catch arms, the chopsticks they're being called. That'll be used to help stack the vehicle and then eventually catch a falling booster and maybe even a ship. Everyone on NSF knows my feelings about that idea, but I'm gonna skip past it for now. So they're still making a lot of progress on the ground side of things as well. Booster 4 getting more preparations. They're installing more Raptors has been one of the more visible aspects of that. Kind of changing from the fit check set of engines that were not flight ready to actually getting flight engines installed. So that was another item they were working on. And yeah, just keeping an eye on the constant progress down there and standing by for word of future testing. Also, in this view, I just like to point out they have Starship 20 sitting out there next to like half of Booster 3. And I keep looking at that going, Super Heavy got shorter. I was like, oh no, that's just it's a partially scrapped booster that's just still sitting there. It's like a mini boost stage or some kind.
So
Don't
weird
know
that
when
it's
they'll
still
finally get
sitting
rid of
there.
that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, they started foundation work on the new bay, on the new
That's true.
higher or wider bay. There's a lot of work going on at that foundation work, so it seems like they really want this new facility going up pretty soon to support more and increased stacking operations in the future. And we did actually some talks on the NSF Discord a bit about how big it could be, and made some really bad math about it. And I'm really looking forward to having a good estimate how big it will be.
I
Also, I
do
want
want to do a
testing.
quick little apology to chat. I realize now that our normal method of pulling questions from the chat isn't collecting them all. So we've been missing some this whole time. I have been trying to ignore you. We do have some that I just pulled from chat, though. The Seats family just asked, when is the best estimate for a Starship stack?
Well, technically they already did that. How long ago was that they did technically?
About
As far as
3
the
weeks ago.
next stack.
We had, I think, 3 different people asking that question. So I just wanted to address it real quick.
Well, they're probably going to test the 2 stages independently for a while. And Booster 4 is still at the production site, so it's hard to put any timeline as to when they'll be ready to roll that out for its testing. Gosh, I don't know. I hate these questions because I feel like I never know enough to even put forth any sort of guess. Before the end of the year. That's my guess.
Yeah, I just go with that because I don't want to. I really don't want to make any guess that in retrospect will make me look like, oh, he said it would be in September, but now it's November.
Oh, please, Adrian, I have said so many bad timeline guesses on the internet, I've given up on any sort of reputation from that end of things.
I have Starship Orbital in October out there, so that's getting closer and
That's
closer. And
not sounding too great, Adrian.
nope, not at all.
By the way, chat, I know we're kind of reworking the question stuff. I think we'll probably have some time if we want to do like Q&A on all of the topics we've talked about. We don't necessarily have to limit that to Starship stuff, Matt. So if you see stuff about stuff we talked about earlier too, happy to go back and do more questions that way.
Okay, sure. Well, then to address very quickly Doc Watson, who had a super chat, what did you think of the new plow that Astra made? Just a brief little.
Do you? I mean, it's good that the grass is gone now, so that the greenkeeper doesn't have to work anymore. It's done. You're free this week.
The weed annihilator. Shikamo asks, will they need to cryo test the orbital tank farm so they can verify it can fuel starships?
Probably well, so when they do the fueling testing, part of that will be testing the ground infrastructure, the tanks and the fuel lines and stuff. Remember that those tanks have a cryo shell around them, which helps them maintain cryo temperature much more easily than a vehicle that has to fly, unless you can't carry this giant shell with you. So that's part of the difference, but they likely do have to go through just some proof testing to make sure that the tanks are all leak free and operating nominally. So Don't know if that'll be visible of any kind, but that is almost certainly part of the process before they activate the tank farm.
We saw some tank farm testing like 1.5 weeks ago.
Yeah, some
It
venting,
was
right?
Yeah, like it's not much, but that probably was what they did. Tested some piping, tested a little bit of stuff, and they will test everything before they use this to fuel a vehicle, because it would be really bad if you damage your vehicle because your ground and surface equipment didn't work properly.
Right.
So that is something you can really like check before.
Another question here from Thanos on sustainability. NASA spaceflight, wasn't the stainless supposed to be able to land with no heat tiles?
No, that was not. So the decision to go to stainless steel was in part due to the thermal characteristics of stainless steel. It is very good at handling high heat, the high energy and the high heat that it will experience during a reentry and landing. But the heat shield tiles were always going to be needed for the Starship vehicle, I believe. That was understood, and it's only on the one side. You see, the other side is still going to be bare stainless steel. Also, a benefit: the super heavy booster doesn't really need a dedicated heat shield. I'm not sure what the engine section will really look like, but it's coming in at less than orbital speeds, so a lot less energy to deal with there. And so the stainless steel will help out in that respect. But the Starship is not expected to be able to survive reentry without any heat shield tiles, no.
And then from Oscar Wilder, what do you think damaged all the tiles?
Some of them would have been them learning about handling the vehicle when they were moving it around and transporting it. Some of them was about working out how best to install them on the vehicle in the first place. Some of them are simply like manufacturing defects or things like that. They could have installed a bunch of tiles for like fit checks rather than ones that they're okay with flying. There's a lot of different things. Thermal protection systems are complicated and important to get right. Um, and the system that is on Starship is very different from the one on Dragon, for example. So they're learning a lot from this process. It's more similar to the space shuttle's thermal protection system and heat shield
Shuttle?
versus Dragons. So
Oh
there you
no.
go.
Shuttle.
So
I mean,
so yeah, there's
we
things to be learned, and they're working through all of that.
yeah, the inspections going on with all the TPS, with the stickers green, red, and writing okay. Yeah, it really indicates that they're trying to learn a lot about the TPS and what they can do to make it looking good, not only looking good but fitting good.
All those colored markers and stuff too, that was directly carried over from the shuttle program. That you saw pictures of the heat shield with tiles marked with things to be worked on and stuff like that. So that is a direct application from shuttle knowledge.
And multiple people are pointing out in chat that there appears to be a brush fire over in Boca Chica right now.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. We'll address that when we have more information. I don't want to jump into that right now.
Okay, all right. From Brett Sebring, any idea who piloted the trainers in the I-4 formation flyby?
So I would assume Jared was flying one of them. And there are pilots that they've been training with, and there are members of the crew like Cyan, I believe, is the pilot for the Inspiration 4 mission. She might have also been at the controls of one of the aircraft. I don't think we know exactly. But Jared, of course, is a pilot, and part of their training is getting aviation experience with those aircraft. So um, they some of the crew members were also doing some flying as well. But I don't know exactly the exact identities of all the people that they've been partnering with for all that training.
Musical Wolves said CRS-23 was also cool to see F9 fly again.
Oh yeah.
First Falcon 9 launch in a while, and hopefully starting to ramp up a bit soon. We're expecting a Starlink launch and Inspiration 4, both coming up later this month. So Falcon 9 launch cadence starting to pick up again too. That'll be good to see.
When you start to even miss Starlink launches, you know it's a long time since Falcon 9 flew. Like I
That
would
is
take a
true.
Starlink launch over right now. I just want to see Falcon 9 again.
It's
More. Like
interesting because so I had traveled to Wallops for the most recent Antares launch, spent some time at Boca Chica, and then California, both in the LA area and then um, the Alameda. Geez, forgetting the place where Astra is. Alameda near Oakland. All of those travels, I only missed one launch, and it was by a day I missed CRS-23 because there was no other launches here from Florida, which is rare, and especially in the age of SpaceX and the Starlink launch campaigns. So yeah, there was that was not normal, but um, good. Hopefully, glad to see that we're starting to ramp up, and including some launches from Vandenberg with the Firefly launch and the upcoming Starlink launch. There's an Atlas V from Vandenberg coming up as well. So Vandenberg is getting a little bit busy.
So Inspiration 4 and Starlink are our two final topics that we have in our notes here today. Inspiration
Yeah.
4 past flight readiness review. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Just a little bit, sure. This is and gave some interesting info about the timing of this launch. A while ago, Jared Isaacman had said that they were going to be hoping for like a dawn launch, a sunrise launch from Cape Canaveral, which would have been very cool, and it's still very much a possibility. This week they passed their flight readiness review, which is a little bit different than the Crew Dragon flight readiness reviews that have happened in the past. First one that was not a NASA mission, but still, NASA was probably still involved from the Kennedy Space Center side of things because they're still part of the launch site, or at least at the very least just as an observer to the whole process. FAA was probably still involved from a regulatory standpoint as well, but primarily this was just SpaceX conducting their flight readiness review with the crew of their private mission. And with that FRR go for launch, they have a 24-hour launch window which opens at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on September 14th, which is midnight UTC, the morning of the 15th, which was that launch date that they had provided earlier. And they say that about 3 days before launch, they're going to narrow that down to a more realistic launch window. No such thing as a 24-hour launch window. You can't close airspace that long, and you can't tell Cape Canaveral range assets to be on standby for 24 hours. That's not how that works. So a couple days before launch, they will come up with a more narrowed launch window. But because this mission isn't going to the International Space Station, it's not rendezvousing with any particular spacecraft or anything like that. The orbit that it goes into is more or less up to the crew. Um, they have a lot more free reign as to when their launch goes, and that means they will not have an instantaneous launch window either. Once they narrow it down, it'll probably be a couple hours so that they can dodge weather if they need to. So a couple days before launch, they'll be looking at that weather forecast, looking at splashdown conditions, because again, the flight's only like 3 days, 2 or 3 days. So splashdown conditions are a pretty immediate concern when they're deciding when to launch. So they'll be looking at all of that and finding the best time to launch for both the crew's experience as far as visuals go and spectators on the ground. I think they want their launch to look spectacular as well. And then making sure all the weather conditions and all the technical items are in line for a successful mission. So we'll stand by for a more narrowed timeline for their launch window, but they are go for launch, and that'll be the next orbital launch out of Florida, I believe. Um, Also,
oh
we
yeah,
got
the
some really
cupola
cool looks of this
pictures.
cupola. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It's so big. Like I didn't expect it to be this wide. I really expected like the head. The problem always with space flight and with rockets is that you kind of lose perspective because they are always next to other big cranes and other things. So I really I had no perspective how big this cupola would be, and now seeing a head in it was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's not why I expected it.
And it's a little bit different from the one on the ISS. The cupola on the ISS has like different panels and things like that, so it's not one continuous window. Obviously, that view is spectacular, but I wonder if it's going to be like distinctly different from the one that they've installed in Dragon here. This one is basically they've replaced the docking port with this cupola. Um, because obviously Dragon is not going to dock to the International Space Station, so no need for a docking port. And it can't dock to the ISS. Like if there's some sort of contingency after launch, it's not going to the ISS's orbit. And so as a result of that, there's not a safe haven sort of docking capability, which is probably, at least in part, why this mission is only going to be a couple days, to make sure that they can come back safely should anything happen. But for the most part, they're going to enjoy a few days of free flying, and I cannot wait to see some of the imagery that's going to come from this. I think they're bringing a lot of cameras, and I think some of those are going to be really, really spectacular. And of course, this is also it separates itself from a lot of the other sort of space tourism that we are seeing from Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic. This mission is centered as a fundraiser to childhood cancer. We have problems to solve here on Earth as well as exploring space. It's a very two-sided effort that we need to be doing both, and this mission is kind of a very strong message that you can do both, and we're going to do so. This mission is, in my opinion, the right way to do a private spaceflight mission at this point in the industry. Um, Especially when it still takes a lot of money to do this kind of thing. Um, this is just a very cool mission that we're excited to be following. Um, so yeah, really excited to see this go in a couple weeks.
Yes.
It's really wonderful. I can't help but think when I see these pictures here in Dallas, we have the Perot Museum, and there is an exhibit on prairie dog tunnel systems for the kids that you can crawl through. And in the middle, there's a little bubble, and you can poke your head out the top. And every time I see these pictures, I just think of that and go, "Oh, they look so happy."
We have some cupola in the McDonald's slide here.
Yes.
When you go to McDonald's, the slide has a cupola on its top, so that looks kind of like that, I have to admit, but it's way cooler than a slide.
We had a question a little bit higher up, if I can find it again. Hang on. This was from Pink Mouse. What do you think of all the media speculation that Blue Origin will fail to provide the engines for ULA as contracted? That's been going on for a while now, hasn't it? The all the speculation, has it progressed at all?
Yeah, I heard there's some sort of meme around, but I never really saw anything about it.
Jeff, where are the engines? Sorry, I'm done. Yeah, that's an ongoing story. I don't believe there's any super recent updates on that front.
Okay.
But for those who are not super familiar, the B4 engine, which was originally designed by Blue Origin for their New Glenn rocket, is now going to also be utilized by ULA's Vulcan rocket. Has been having some delays, and Blue Origin has not yet delivered the first set of flight engines to ULA, which is a concern for the rocket's readiness. Tori Bruno, the CEO of United Launch Alliance, has said that while the engines are the pacing item for the rocket's readiness, meaning that all the other items that are needed prior to the rocket being ready to fly are farther ahead of schedule than the engines are. So the engines are the item causing the current first flight schedule as far as the rocket's readiness is concerned. He differentiated from that, saying that that does not mean that those engines are causing the current first flight target, because the payload readiness for the first flight is actually the pacing item for the flight itself, meaning that even with the delays to the engine, the rocket will still be ready before the payload is. That is the most recent news we heard from ULA proper. Of course, that's coming from a source that is in their interest to make them sound like they're ready. So it's important to just keep that in mind when you're talking about these kind of stories. Obviously, Blue Origin and ULA are going to both say they're doing their jobs when you ask them about this. You want to look at independent sources to know the complete picture of what's going on. But that's the last we heard from ULA specifically. And it's moving down the road as to when those engines will be delivered and when ULA will be ready to conduct a static fire test ahead of their first flight with their actual engines. That first flight is now no earlier than 2022, and we're going to continue to watch that story because that'll be a new rocket coming online that is very important to the future of ULA as a launch provider.
Every time we mention Blue Origin, it's like hitting the NOS on chat. It just goes.
Yeah, a little bit.
Starlink was our
Yes,
last topic that we had, I think.
Yeah, we have a small update on the Starlink program. SpaceX, actually, this was the morning of the Firefly launch out at Vandenberg, which I found as interesting. Normally here at Cape Canaveral, having like a static fire and a launch on the same day is not impossible, but it's usually they like to space these things out. And given that Vandenberg isn't entirely like super busy, it was just a little bit surprising that um, the range supported a static fire test and a launch attempt on the same day. But SpaceX did complete a static fire for Falcon 9 for their first Starlink mission from the West Coast. This is them moving into another shell of their initial constellation um, at a different inclination. I believe this first flight is going to a 70-degree inclination, if I'm not mistaken, which is kind of near polar but not quite polar orbit. And it'll be carrying the first batch of Starlink satellites for that set of the satellite constellation. We had some information from Michael Baylor about the naming of this mission. Of course, SpaceX and naming conventions are an interesting relationship, but we do know that based on the FCC documentation for these flights, this particular mission is designated Starlink Group 2-1, the first launch of the second group of Starlinks to interpret that, excuse me. So that is the Starlink mission that we are expecting from Vandenberg later this month. Don't have a launch date yet, but we'll stay tuned. Based on the wording of this tweet, sounds like SpaceX sounds like they conducted the static fire test a little bit earlier with regards to the launch date as than normal, which might have just been a result of they haven't launched from Vandenberg in a while, so wanting to work through all the pad systems and things like that, and give them plenty of time to work through anything they need to. But that should be right alongside Inspiration, the two next SpaceX launches, one from California and one from Florida.
Thank you very much.
Do we
We've got
actually know? Oh, one thing.
Yeah.
Do we actually know what booster will that support, or is that not known yet?
I do not believe we have any confirmed booster. Never mind. Of course, I said that slow enough that Michael could correct me. Booster 1049 is the booster that we do expect for this mission. Thank you, Michael.
So that's
And that
10,
would
right?
make it the 10th flight of the booster, right? Yep. So booster
Yes.
1049 on its 10th flight. Yeah. So there you go.
10 double digits. Always exciting.
More boosters getting farther in their launch histories. Yep. Also, will be the first time, of course, I Still Love You makes a recovery attempt on the West Coast, since it has made the trip over from Florida. So, not the first landing for that drone ship, but the first one in the Pacific Ocean. So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
Musical Wolf just said, was Amazon complaining about G2 Starlinks?
Yeah, so Amazon, the operator of the Kuiper constellation, there is a trend here of Jeff Bezos companies being upset about SpaceX. um, but yeah, Amazon does have an up and coming internet constellation of their own, allegedly. No satellites have been built yet, as far as we can tell. They don't have launches coming up yet. But they did book some launches with United Launch Alliance on Atlas V. And that is one of the Starlink competitors that is supposed to be coming online in the not too distant future. And they were filing some complaints about the Starlink constellation, not too different from the OneWeb complaints, which are basically saying this company is competing with us, slow them down, which is not how that works. So there's not going to be anything coming from that, I do not believe. Um, there's been suits from Blue Origin regarding the Human Landing System program, trying to slow SpaceX down on that front. There are Starlink contests from Amazon and other companies. Some of this gets old really quickly. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, and finally from Chaz in DFW, when are we going to get an interview with our newest NSF team member, Nick?
Yes, we do have a new NSF team member down in Boca Chica, Nick, doing some photography and videography on a lot of the daily videos right now. I know Mary is out of town for a little bit, so we've got some Stephen Mars down there too. We've got some other people filling in the gap really quick. If you have not followed Nick, there his is Twitter. Definitely check him out for some more Starship content. Don't know. I guess I'll have to reach out to them and see if he wants to make some appearances on some live NSF content. So, Chad, I'll get back to you on that. I'll check what Nick's up to.
All right, and with that, I think we have gone through everything that we have today. Good job, guys.
We have. And there's some things to talk about. Glad we could cover that. Glad we could take some questions as always. I was glad to be back. Oh, I have another thing. Glad to be back on NSF Live because I was away for forever. I'm in a new place now. But the stuff in the background of myself right now is temporary. Most of this is not going to be there for forever. I'm looking for ideas for what my new studio background should be. So if you've got ideas, tweet me at TGMetsFan98. Let me know what I should put behind me for NSF Live and the other broadcasts where you can see my face here in Florida. I'm looking for ideas. So let me know what you got.
Elon
that
needs to send you a
Ares one?
Raptor engine.
That would be
Oh,
cool.
God.
If anyone has a rocket engine that they are okay with me putting behind me in broadcast, please, that would be a wonderful idea. Please send it my way.
That shipping would be expensive.
I think if I was getting a rocket engine out of it, I would probably be willing to pay shipping.
Pile it over.
That's nice.
All right. Well, that's going to conclude our broadcast. We're running a little bit early today, but that's okay. We got through everything. It's just a natural end. So we've got the live stream that we're going to head to right now. We've always got a 24/7 live stream going on NASASpaceflight that you can check out at any time and join the conversation there. There was word of a little bit of a brush fire. I don't know if that's visible from the camera. We know.
I don't know.
No.
We'll come back to that later.
Okay. All right. Anyway, it's up. You can check it out. A big thank you to our members who are subscribed to the channel, and their donations to the channel help keep everything going around here and help keep NASASpaceflight Live operational as well. And a big thank you to everybody who did super chats as well. And big thank you to you for just showing up today and being part of the conversation or just watching. Showing your support comes in all different forms. So thank you very, very much for that. We really appreciate everything that you do for us. I think that
Absolutely.
can go ahead and end us, right?
I think so. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today as our host and taking all the questions. We appreciate that as always. And Adrian, thanks
pleasure.
for talking space flight with me as well. It's always great to be back on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was fun. I love talking rockets.
All right. See you soon, everybody. Goodbye.
Good night.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
Our UPS pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down speed off. Bring in speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.